I want to tell you about a number that genuinely shocked me when I first heard it. A researcher once tracked exactly how many times certain students repeated specific vocabulary words during their study sessions. Some students repeated individual words well over 100 times across several weeks, reading them, writing them, saying them quietly under their breath, again and again. And yet, when tested weeks later, many of these same students performed barely better than students who had repeated those same words far fewer times, but in a slightly different way. This confused researchers for years until they finally understood something important. Repetition alone was never actually the active ingredient making memory work. Something else, something most learners never even think about, was doing almost all the real work, quietly behind the scenes. My name is Emma, and this is Train Your English Brain. I want to tell you about a student named Sven, because his experience captures this problem perfectly. Sven was, without exaggeration, one of the most repetition-focused students I've ever taught. He created elaborate systems. He would write a single word 50 times in a row, convinced that sheer physical repetition would force it permanently into his memory through pure volume alone. He told me once, almost proudly, "Emma, I wrote necessary 100 times yesterday. I should know that word perfectly by now." A week later, completely by accident, I asked him to spell that exact word in a sentence. He hesitated, clearly uncertain, and got it wrong. 100 repetitions, and the word still hadn't truly settled into permanent memory. This wasn't because Sven lacked discipline. If anything, his discipline was remarkable. The problem was that his repetitions, despite their impressive quantity, were missing something crucial that determines whether repetition actually translates into lasting memory at all. Here's what researchers eventually discovered, and it completely changed how memory scientists think about repetition. The quality of attention during each repetition matters far more than the sheer number of repetitions themselves. When you repeat something mindlessly, writing the same word 50 times while your mind wanders elsewhere, each repetition contributes almost nothing additional to your memory, regardless of how many times you physically perform the action. Your brain essentially treats these mindless repetitions as one single shallow encounter, repeated mechanically, rather than as 50 genuinely separate learning opportunities. This explains exactly what happened with Sven. Writing necessary 100 times in a row, especially after the first several instances, almost certainly involved his conscious attention drifting elsewhere. His hand kept moving, but his mind had essentially checked out of the actual learning process. The remaining 80 repetitions added almost no additional memory benefit, despite representing significant additional time and physical effort. This is sometimes called the difference between repetition and rehearsal. Mindless repetition keeps information circulating briefly in working memory without ever deeply encoding it into long-term storage. Genuine rehearsal, the kind that actually builds lasting memory, requires active mental engagement each time, not simply mechanical repetition of motion. There's a second crucial factor researchers identified, and this one might be the most counterintuitive part of this entire topic. Difficulty during recall actually strengthens memory more than easy, effortless repetition does. This sounds backward at first. Surely, if something feels easy and smooth, that means you're learning it well. But memory research consistently shows the opposite pattern. When recalling information feels slightly difficult, when you have to genuinely search for the answer rather than having it appear instantly and effortlessly, that struggle itself strengthens the memory trace far more than smooth, easy repetition ever does. This is sometimes called what researchers call the testing effect. Actively trying to recall information, even imperfectly, even with some genuine struggle involved, builds stronger memory than simply rereading or rewriting that same information repeatedly. Sven's 100 repetitions of necessary were entirely passive copying, with zero genuine retrieval effort involved at any point. He never once had to actually search his memory for the word. He simply copied what was directly in front of him, over and over, without ever testing whether his memory could actually produce it independently from memory. I want to bring these two factors together because understanding both explains exactly why Sven's impressive effort produced such disappointing results. His repetitions lacked genuine attention, becoming increasingly mechanical and mindless after the first several instances, and his repetitions involved zero actual retrieval difficulty, since he was simply copying visible text rather than ever testing whether his memory could produce the word independently from memory. Both crucial ingredients, focused attention and genuine retrieval struggle, were essentially missing from his entire process, regardless of how many total repetitions he performed. This is the real reason why 100 mindless, easy repetitions can produce less lasting memory than even 5 or 6 genuine, effortful, attentive recall practice. So, knowing this, how should you actually approach repetition differently going forward? The first thing is to dramatically reduce your total repetition count while simultaneously increasing the genuine mental effort involved in each one. Instead of writing a word 50 times while copying it directly from a list, try writing it 5 times, but each time cover the original word first and force yourself to genuinely recall and produce the spelling independently, checking only afterward to verify. The second thing is to deliberately introduce small gaps of difficulty between repetitions, rather than repeating something immediately and continuously. Study a word, then wait several minutes doing something else entirely before testing whether you can still recall it. This small delay forces genuine retrieval effort, rather than simply allowing the word to remain passively active in short-term working memory throughout continuous repetition. The third thing is to actively notice when your repetition has become mindless mechanical motion rather than genuine mental engagement, and treat that as a signal to stop entirely rather than push through with more repetitions in that same disengaged state. More mindless repetition at that point adds essentially nothing. A short break, followed by renewed genuine attention, will accomplish far more than continuing mechanically. I want to come back to Sven's story because what changed afterwards genuinely surprised both of us. He drastically reduced his repetition count, sometimes down to just 5 or 6 genuine attempts per word, but each attempt now involved covering the word entirely and forcing himself to actually recall and produce it from memory, checking only afterward to verify. Several weeks later, when I tested him on vocabulary using this new method, his retention had dramatically improved compared to his previous 100 repetition approach, despite investing significantly less total time and effort overall. He told me, almost laughing at himself, "Emma, I used to think more repetition always meant more learning. Now I understand it was never really about the number at all." If you've ever repeated an English word dozens of times, convinced that sheer volume alone would eventually force it into permanent memory, I want you to understand clearly why that approach so often quietly fails. Repetition without genuine attention and retrieval effort isn't actually building memory at all. It's simply consuming time while creating an illusion of productive study. Reduce your repetitions, increase your genuine retrieval effort within each one, allow small gaps of productive difficulty between attempts. 5 genuinely effortful repetitions will consistently outperform 100 mindless ones. The number was never really the point. My name is Emma. I will see you in the next episode.